Hi, folks, and welcome back to the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, and we get to talk about another massive new thing here in the Star Wars publication timeline. And it's the first of the Dark Horse comic books. We're finally done with Marvel, and at least for a long time. And now we're into Dark Horse. And this was the first thing that they did, and man, oh man, was this another home run. We're in 1991, and this is a 6-issue miniseries by Tom Veitch and Camm Kennedy, and it went from 1991 of December to late 1992, and it is, of course, Dark Empire. Now, like I said, it was a 6-issue miniseries, and I only actually have one issue of it in singles. I don't know why. I found it for like $1 back in high school when I was buying comics, and I thought it was part of Dark Empire 2 because I found them all in singles there for like $1. And I picked this one up, and I was like, oh, it's Dark Empire 1, and I don't have the single issues, I already have the trade. Then, of course, I'd go and buy the trade of Dark Empire 2. But regardless, this is issue 4 of that series. There was also a pretty cool thing that came out as well from Dark Horse about Dark Empire, and it was, now this came out a lot later, but this was the Dark Empire handbook, and would tell you all about Dark Empire. Like, for example, here is Luke Skywalker during that time. So anyways, the Dark Empire was, like I said, Tom Veitch and Camm Kennedy, and then Dave Dorman did the covers. Now, Dave Dorman is probably my favorite Star Wars artist, and honestly, this is the best part about the series, for me at least, or my favorite part of the series. This is obviously the front here with Luke, and then on the back, he did these amazing pieces here. I actually got to meet Dave Dorman. I've met him twice before. The first time was at a comic convention, and I bought a cool print from him, and he signed it for me, just because Luke is my favorite character here. He actually signed it there, and then let me pick this up from him. So this is actually one of the covers from Dark Empire. I believe it's Dark Empire 2. In the original cover, the lightsaber isn't ignited. This is actually part of this, or just for the print, but where Luke's lightsaber is in fact ignited. But it is very, very cool to have that signature. So there was also in 1994 an audio drama of Dark Empire. It's on YouTube. The sequels got ones as well, which is very cool. There's also this really cool fan cartoon series that people are starting to do for it, and so that's really cool as well. So let's get into a little bit of the behind the scenes, or the start of Dark Empire. So this was actually conceived way back by Tom Veitch, back actually during the Marvel era. You can actually see in one of the Star Wars comics, there's actually was like an ad for what's coming next in this new thing, and it was Dark Empire. Now, so you go in there, and then, of course, Marvel lost the rights. They didn't want anything to do with Star Wars anymore. They were done with it. Like a lot of people were moving on from Star Wars. So, come in, and Dark Horse gets the rights to do Star Wars comics again. And so Tom Veitch is like, hey, I want to do Dark Empire. And Lucasfilm said, and Dark Horse were like, okay, cool, do Dark Empire. So it was actually, something that was kind of interesting here, was actually meant to take place before the Thrawn trilogy. In fact, this was meant to be right before that. However, when this was pitched to Timothy Zahn and said, hey, you need to, I don't know who said this. This might have been, this must have been Lucasfilm or Dell or Bantam. I don't know. I would assume it would be Bantam who said this to Zahn per Lucasfilm or whatever. They basically said, hey, Timothy Zahn, you need to, this is what we're going to be starting with, Dark Empire. You need to have your novels take place after this, and you need to conform with this. Zahn decided, no, I don't want to. Timothy Zahn at the time, I don't really know about now, just because he's written comic books before, or since then, or since this. But at the time, Timothy Zahn did not have a respect for the comic book medium. I think he thought that comic books, or he seemed to give off the vibe that he was above comic books. I'm a novel author. I write novels. I write real fiction. Comic books are just funny books. He kind of gave off that vibe. And if you read interviews and kind of stuff and hear people talk about the situation, like who were involved with Dark Empire and all that, you kind of get that vibe that Timothy Zahn didn't think very highly of Dark Empire. It wasn't until Kevin J. Anderson came along in his Jedi Academy trilogy and actually referenced Dark Empire. And in fact, that's where people would go, hey, Dark Horse, like, we really like this. Are you a part of, like, the official Star Wars continuity that they're doing now? And Dark Horse is like, I don't know. We want to be, but we don't know. Then, of course, Kevin J. Anderson, I think like the first or second page of Jedi Search, the first novel of that trilogy, mentions Dark Empire. So right off the bat, Kevin J. Anderson is like, hey, come on in to the fold. I'm bringing you in. This is going to be awesome. So they kind of had, because Timothy Zahn didn't want to play nice, and for whatever reason, Bantam didn't want to fight him on it. I don't know why they didn't want to fight him on it. It's not like he had anything to lose. Again, Timothy Zahn didn't have the celebrity factor or the credentials, I guess, at that point, because the Thrawn trilogy hadn't been released. So they had to come in and they kind of had to say, okay, well, now we got to restructure this in the opening crawl, which does, in fact, it's a very long opening crawl, but it does reference and kind of hint at, you know, what has happened. And they mention the Thrawn trilogy. So they have to kind of adjust things here. Now, George Lucas also read this and was highly involved in this and really did like the idea. Now, Tom Veitch actually said he wanted to bring back Darth Vader or someone wearing Darth Vader's armor. George said no. But if you can find a way to bring Palpatine back, I'm okay with that. And so, basically, that's kind of where we go from here. Now, this story introduces a lot of new things. It's after the Thrawn trilogy, like I said. The Empire takes back Coruscant very briefly. And the Empire is controlled by none other than Darth Sidious himself, Palpatine. Basically, you're saying, what? I thought he died in Return of the Jedi. He did, but basically, in essence of Palpatine's spirit, right before it blew up, his body blew up, transferred itself into a clone body. Now, George Lucas basically set the record straight where he said that when, like, Palpatine's original body is what blew up on the Death Star. Like, the body we see in the prequel trilogy and in the original trilogy, like, that is Palpatine's real body. That is what blew up on the Death Star. And so he's been burning through clone bodies because these clones, he can't get them to be like stable, I guess. And so he's been burning through clone bodies really quickly. Now, some people might be like, well, what? That's so weird. That's like, he's alive still? Well, personally, I think that actually fits in with Palpatine's character. In fact, we see that in Revenge of the Sith. He's trying to figure out immortality. In fact, he even mentions to Anakin that Plagueis didn't actually figure out the series, like the way to be immortal. And he kind of says it kind of cautiously. If you watch that scene, Ian McDiarmid kind of plays it as, hey, you know, we'll figure it out together. And he's trying to do that here. So it makes sense. And we see this in Revenge of the Sith. So Palpatine's back, or at least an essence of his spirit is back in a clone body. And Luke decides that the way to defeat Palpatine is to learn the dark side from within. So he actually bows in front of Palp and basically says, oh, my father's destiny is my own. And you can see that panel here. Now, quick side note here. The art by Camm Kennedy is very, very unique. Like, for example, here's Luke pulling down an AT-AT and puts around like a force shield or whatever around himself. The art is one of those, you either love it or you hate it. It's a very unique art style. I'll admit I appreciate how unique it is, but again, when you look at, I remember as a kid initially being like, what the heck? Just because you see these covers, these realistic covers by Dave Dorman, and then you open it up and it's a very pink, blue, green kind of color scheme. In fact, this one right here is kind of pretty much the different colors that are on it. By Empire's End, which is the third of this trilogy, I guess, they kind of ditched that and went more for a little bit more realistic view, I guess. So Luke, anyways, decides to join the dark side, become Palpatine's apprentice, or new apprentice, and learn it from within. Kind of is mirrored later on in the EU by Quinlan Vos. But anyways, so the World Devastator is trying to destroy Mon Calamari here. And so that's kind of the big conflict here. Now, Leia is actually pregnant with baby number 3, and that, of course, is Anakin Solo. So, E-Wings are introduced here, and also, we find this out in, actually, I think it is actually the 4th issue here, but we do find it out in this story that, in fact, Boba Fett, yeah, it is issue 4, is actually alive. It is in issue 4. So we find that, now obviously we talked about this in our coverage where Boba Fett gets out of the Sarlacc pit, but then we see him fall back in, and Jaw was a Doom in the Marvel series. And then, of course, he escapes again. This is elaborated on a little later in the Bounty Hunting Wars trilogy, which we'll talk about eventually, with the help of Dengar. So we don't really know what Boba Fett has been up to since he gets out that second time and up to here. But it's like, oh, issue 4, Boba Fett is back. And so that's later explained. Also in Dark Empire, holocrons are introduced at this point, which is a huge thing here. So basically, I think it's obvious at this point that Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, did this whole thing, which I thought was really silly because, folks, for the longest time, and even now, to this point, even after Episode 9 did this, people have not liked Dark Empire. Not because of the, maybe partly because of the story, I guess, but mainly because people have seen that bringing Palpatine back negates the sacrifice that Anakin Skywalker made at the end of Episode 6. And for the longest time, I agreed with that. I agreed that it was, or at least I thought that. Now, I'm under the impression that it doesn't negate Anakin's sacrifice. Now, I don't know in Episode 9 if that was actually Palpatine, if it was a clone body. I don't know if in the movie they explain it. I don't know if in Disney's EU they explain it. Those of you who know, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But anyways, I don't think that at least Dark Empire negates Anakin's sacrifice, because Anakin, I think that the Jedi kind of viewed it as black and white of destroy the Sith, bring balance to the Force. Well, there's no balance, right? You just destroyed the Sith, not the Jedi. Well, and then we kind of see that Anakin not only did destroy the Sith, but he also kind of got rid of the Jedi Order, because the Jedi had been so stuck in their ivory tower mindset that it did kind of bring it back to balance, right? But mainly what Anakin did was getting rid of the taint on the Force that Plagueis and Palpatine had done. Because they were the ones who kind of messed around, as we find out later in the Darth Plagueis novel, and in other Star Wars lore, they were messing around with the midichlorians trying to create the secret to eternal life, and then, of course, the Force retaliated, and the midichlorians conceived Anakin. So they destroyed that taint on the Force that Palpatine did. That's really what it was. And so Palpatine was destroyed. Like I said, this is just an essence of his spirit in clone bodies. Now, obviously, he is trying to come back full force, but the point is that no, it doesn't negate the sacrifice that Anakin made, because the destruction that Plagueis and Palpatine did ultimately have on the Force is negated. It's done. And so now, going forward in the expanded universe, you do have Jedi, you do have Sith and Dark Jedi, but the point is that they didn't get to that level, that rule of two-esque level that Palpatine did. Now, obviously, they maybe got a little close in the Legacy comic books, but the point is that what Plagueis and Palpatine did, that was wiped out by Anakin, by destroying that line, by destroying the rule of two Darth Bane Sith order in Return of the Jedi. This is Palpatine doing, or in essence, like I said, trying to do a ditch effort. But that's kind of how I perceive it. To me, this doesn't negate the Chosen One prophecy and doesn't, downplay what Anakin did for his son. Obviously, I think that this story handles the whole Resurrection Emperor a lot better than Rise of Skywalker did, from what little I have been told about it. So if you didn't like Episode 9, if you didn't like what they did, I think that Dark Empire would be a great alternative, and I think it handles it very well. Now, of course, the question becomes, okay, but is Dark Empire an essential expanded universe read? Folks, I'm going to say yes. I think it is, regardless of what you think about the idea of Sidious coming back in whatever capacity. This does introduce a lot to the Star Wars lore. This does bring in a lot of Star Wars mainstays. Obviously, it explains how Boba Fett is back, and we'll see that in later on in other Star Wars stories where Boba Fett is back, so we have to have this to kind of explain how in the world did he get back. And again, this whole, event is mentioned in, like I said, other Star Wars novels that come beforehand. But again, I think that this also does help complement Episode 3 and complement the Emperor's character in the films, because we know that he is trying to find the secret to eternal life. And it does kind of create more of that sinister plotting that, again, adds to the movies and gives them more depth and meaning. So I really like Dark Empire. Personally, I think this is better than the other two sequels. So if you are going to read any Dark Empire, I would just read this one, though 2 and 3, especially 3, or Empire's End is what it's actually called, does resolve the conflict and does put a whole bow on it, and then we move on to the next one. But folks, Dark Empire, I think, is really great, and I think you're disservicing yourself if you don't read it. If you didn't initially like it, like me, I'd say go back, check it out again, and, look at it from this perspective, and hey, maybe it'll change for you. It did for me. But folks, that is all the time that I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time with another episode of the Star Wars Library.